There were two, and I'll deal with the most trivial mention first. In 1956, he wrote actually it's a nuclear thriller really, called The Car of Gifford Hillary, in which a man is murdered by his wife and returns. Dennis Wheatley wrote occult novels, and he was a firm believer in reincarnation, I might add, although much of what he wrote he knew was fantasy. It's in this book, the man returns from the dead and takes revenge on his murderous wife. And a lot of the action takes place, although there's only a brief mention of where it takes place, in a beach house on the Solent facing the Isle of Wight. Now, I've looked and I've never managed to find it, but it may be there. And if anyone would care to look, one of your listeners, I'd be very pleased to learn where it is. But the biggest mention, the most significant mention, is in a book called The Launching of Roger Brooke. Up until the time that Dennis Wheatley went to Lymington, his two principal characters were his first one, the Duc de Richelieu, an elderly French exile who, while frail, was extremely cunning and managed to get his much younger friends out of the most desperate situations they got into in Soviet Russia and revolutionary Spain and places like that, and his wartime hero, Gregory Sallust. But when he was in Lymington, he invented a new character called Roger Brooke, who was a secret agent in the time of William Pitt and scheming against Napoleon, although he was a friend of Napoleon's in the book as well, of course. And the reason that Dennis Wheatley came up with Roger Brooke was apparently because his mind was so stuffed full of classified information, which is probably true, that if he overstepped the mark by mistake with a book set in modern times, it would be noticed. So he thought if he went back a few hundred years, he'd be on safer ground. So he invented this character, Roger Brooke, and Roger's father, with whom Roger didn't get on, was an admiral who lived in a house which happens to be Grove Place. And Roger is born in Grove Place, and there's quite a nice description of a family row early on before Roger storms out to seek his fortune. There's a mention briefly of the churchyard in the church up Church Lane. I think that's St. Thomas the Apostle. That gets a mention in the book. And the pub in the High Street, which was called the Angel, and I think it may have been renamed recently, that appears in the book as well. So there are quite a few local things in it. And there's also one other thing which may or may not exist, and perhaps you or your listeners can help me with it. At one stage, early on, Roger has a girlfriend called Georgina, and they take their picnic up a large tower. Now, my immediate thought was that it was the Sway Tower, but Dennis goes into some detail, and the tower that he is talking about is definitely made of iron. And it's made of iron because Georgina's father is an ironmaster. And anyway, they have a picnic up the tower, and it doesn't appear in the published novel, but Roger Brooke loses his virginity at the top of the tower. And I've never been able to locate it, but if there is or was an iron tower in the vicinity, I'd be very intrigued to know where it is. If not, I guess the Sway Tower is probably the inspiration. But if any of your listeners want to read a Dennis Wheatley novel which features Lymington, then The Launching of Roger Brooke is certainly it.